We are here with Barak, reading 5. We've finished Act 1. The past is prologue. We are starting Act 2, Chapter 1. Barak,
Yep.
take
Thank
it
you.
away.
Thank you. So, yeah, we finished laying the tapestry, hopefully dangling a whole bunch of plot hooks in front of you. I think each person from our private conversations have picked up on a few, and they're not the same ones, which is super neat for me as the author. And we are now, if the previous act was a bunch of events in the past, essentially either people or places or times, people's places in various parts of this world that are disconnected. This is present time. So this is where your traditional book would start. It would start now, but instead you got a whole bunch of very long prologue leading into this moment. And we'll see. It's a new way of putting a book together, I think, and we'll see how that works out. Act 2, which is what this is called. Here, I'm going to hold it to the screen. Right? In which our heroes form bonds, gain insights, and start to dream, which is a sort of an important aspect of all this, as you will discover when it starts happening. So, Act 2, Chapter 1, Arrival. It was an atypically slow day at the Shallows docks, but this happened occasionally in late summer when the winds were unpredictable and ships sometimes didn't quite arrive on schedule. Only about half of the berths were occupied with different vessels, the biggest of which was the Marinda, a mid-sized ship that usually dealt in spices and high-end jewelry from the Far East. Lormic walked casually over towards the Steadfast Inn. He shifted his gaze upwards. Trade Bay was a bit fuller, but not by much. Across the shallow bay that filled the bottom of the volcano's core and effectively served as the floor of Lavatown, a small merchant ship was slowly entering the elevator. And if you looked out to sea, you could see a few straggling trawlers headed back with the morning's catch. As he neared the inn, Lormic noticed that the foot traffic was also atypically slow for midday. He nodded and smiled at a couple of locals who recognized him from Majiv's church and kept moving. The elf woman's note said to be there at high noon, and the sun had already begun to crest the viewing platform across the top of the gash. He would be there in good time. When he got closer to the entrance, he couldn't fail to notice the incredibly tall, thin woman that stood hesitantly at some distance in front of the swinging doors, seemingly deep in thought. He quickened his pace somewhat while changing direction so that he would approach her from the side. He did not wish to alarm her. "Are you looking for something, ma'am?" he asked loudly as he got nearer. The woman didn't seem to notice him. He stepped closer and spoke again. "Ma'am, are you in search of something? Perhaps I can offer some assistance." Startled, she snapped her head and met his eyes. Her yellow hair was tucked inside her straw hat, which was wide of brim and pulled down tightly enough to cover the top half of her ears. The hat followed the movement of her head, causing the shadows over her face to shift rapidly. It made it seem to Lormic as if her eyes changed colors momentarily. Fetching, that, Lormic couldn't help but think as he looked at her face. Truly fetching. He stopped a couple of steps away from the woman and smiled reassuringly. "I know most of everything there is to know around these parts," he offered. Then he pointed at the inn. "If you're in need of lodging, this is a great place to stay." She shook her head. "No," she said in a quiet tone, and after a second added, "I have a meeting here." Her intonation was very precise, yet came across as a bit awkward. "Well, how funny is that? So do I," he exclaimed in response. After a moment, he pointed towards the doors. "Shall we?" Solis looked at him for a moment, then nodded. As they started walking towards the inn, they failed to notice that its doors were swinging slightly, especially since they had not seen anyone passing through them. Both of them also failed to notice the gnome that had just slipped inside after stepping nimbly and almost invisibly in the shadows along the side of the inn. Once inside, the two of them moved towards the bar, Lormic's purposeful stride matched by Solis's longer steps. The bartender, who knew both of them, raised her head and smiled. "I don't see you here often, Lormic. Your dad okay?" "Yeah, he's good," he replied. "A little busy. Lots of hungry people, you know." "Bless his heart. I don't know what the Shallows would be without him, my boy." The bartender said, then turned her head towards the woman. As for you, young lady, you still owe me for your breakfast yesterday. The bartender winked and grinned. You ran out of here so quickly, I would have thought that you'd stolen something. Solace blushed slightly as she took a coin out of a hidden pocket and handed it to the bartender. Quite fetching indeed, Lomac thought again as he snuck a sideways look at her. Then he turned back to the bartender. Listen, Trina, I'm supposed to be meeting someone, but I don't know for sure where or even who they are. Do you know, maybe? He asked. Trina's eyes lost their twinkle, and her smile vanished. Truth is, I do. You have a meeting too, don't you, Solace? She said. Solace nodded. All right. They said to head over downstairs. It's the room at the end of the hallway, you know, the one that is right at the edge of the dock. Lomac and Solace looked at each other in surprise, then back at the bartender. Wait, they both said at once, which startled them. A second passed, then Lomac grinned and spoke up. You mean we're both invited to the same meeting? Seems that way, Trina responded cheerfully. Then she turned her head back to the large, muscular brute that was sitting in front of a back door next to the kitchen. Yo, Stinky, check him and tag him and let him through. And looking back at Lomac and Solace added, Go along now, the other two are already here. The half-orc bouncer stood up, flashing a hideous grin that could have easily given most anyone a heart attack. His intimidating posture and the slight protrusions on his broad forehead exhibited clear traces of his orcan blood. His muscles rippled all over his half-naked body, and his large, calloused hands flexed in the dim light, making it clear that one should remain on their best behavior around him to avoid having the daylights punched out of them. Particularly unruly patrons of the bar would learn that painful lesson from experience. What other two? Lomac asked in confusion. Solace seemed puzzled as well. Trina said nothing and pointed at the door. Then, as they looked at each other, she went back to arranging glasses. Come here, the bouncer instructed them in a deep, guttural voice. Somewhat hesitantly, they made their way over to the door. The bouncer sprang into action. His hands moved quickly and efficiently, removing the almost foot-long dagger that Lomac always carried at his side and putting it on the table. Then he turned to Solace, whose thin frame nevertheless towered over the massive half-orc. He frisked her quickly as well, locating and removing the knife she had hidden in her boot. I'll keep him safe for you, Stinky said, grinning again. Then he moved sideways, pushed open the door, and gestured for them to move through. The door's spring-loaded hinges were already causing it to shut slowly. They continued into the hallway beyond, and Stinky turned back and sat in his chair. As he did so, the door closed quietly, but the shadows around it seemed to move in a way that, had anyone noticed, would have seemed unnatural and perhaps aroused their curiosity. In reality, nobody saw it, nor paid any attention to it. So this is the end of the first chapter of Act 2. We're doing a double feature tonight. So we're moving right into the next one. But anything, yeah, it is. That's why we wanted to do that.
Yeah, I like tying in the familiar names and the familiar descriptions of the people, but it's actually in a different way than you did before.
Right. So before was the, it a little detached, a little like outside observation. You're looking at things from above. Now you're like zooming right in. You're right there, right? That's the whole point of the, as I said, it's a flipping into present time.
Yeah, different perspective.
And this is going to happen. So I'm playing with perspectives a lot.
Yeah. Well, it's working.
Yeah. Anything else, or should we just jump in? Jump in.
Yeah.
Dan? Good? All right. Act 2, Chapter 2, First Contact. Lomac followed Solace down the hall. It had one door set a third of the way along its left wall, which opened on the office and proprietor's residence and the old and somewhat mysterious dwarf, Bavin. The right wall hugged the kitchen and ended in a stair leading to the lower dock level. At the bottom, the main hallway doubled back on itself, leading back in the direction they had come from. That area wasn't well lit, and the way was blocked by a sentry, clearly marking it off limits. Instead, they turned left into a small alcove set with another door. Puzzled, Solace looked back at Lomac, and he returned her gaze, shrugging his shoulders slightly. Don't know, ma'am, he said quietly. Never been down here before. Solace turned away from him, reached down to the handle, and pushed the door open. His deeply ingrained tutoring guiding him to protect her, Lormek moved past Solis to enter first as they stepped inside. And as they peered inside, neither of them heard the quick, quiet struggle behind them. The room was, in its own way, rather remarkable. It was quite spacious, at least 25 feet to a side, and was as richly appointed as it was eclectic. The walls were covered in art, each painting an item perfectly crafted and breathtakingly gorgeous, but without any discernible rhyme or reason. Hanging drapes of velvet and silk were mounted across the room, extending on both sides and away from the door, hinting at multiple configurations and uses for the room. Both sets of drapes were currently open, so they couldn't quite examine the delicate, intricate silver and gold embroidery covering them, but it was easy to imagine how beautiful they were, even with what little could be seen along the top. On the right, a large window overlooked the low docks and the water. Facing it was the kind of couch one might find in houses on second-level shelves. It was heavy and deep, and the plush velvet cushions were so inviting that to sit on them would make you never want to get up. A keen observer might note that the couch seemed too large to fit in either the wide entrance door or the narrower one set at the far end of the room. This observation would be true. Indeed, it was built inside the room hundreds of years ago. To each of the couch's sides sat a similarly comfortable-looking easy chair. The far one was turned towards the entrance door. It was occupied by a fair-skinned, wise-looking elven woman with short brown hair and unexpectedly large hazel eyes, who maintained perfect poise as she sat. Resting on the chair next to her was a small, ornate-looking lute. She slowly raised a glass of red wine to her lips. On the left, a long serving table against the wall ran the length of the room. It was covered in plates laden with breads and rolls, smoked meats, a variety of white and yellow cheeses, and different fruits. There were even some exotic ones, like bananas and watermelon. Enough of everything was present that a dozen people could easily share in a feast. Towards the far end were a half-full carafe of red wine, a jug of water, and a bigger one of ale. Next to them were cloth napkins and a small stack of empty wooden plates and cups, as well as a few upturned wine glasses. At the opposite end of the room, right next to the tied-up drapes, stood a plain-looking man whose bald face, loose clothing, lack of visible weapons, and relaxed posture suggested he was a trained killer. The center of the room was covered in a soft, thick rug that extended nearly to each wall. The rug was clearly an import, woven as it was with the complicated patterns that bespoke the Eastern culture of the highly skilled artisans who wove it. A rug of this size and superb quality would take many months to make. It would fetch a fortune in gold in the capital and become an instant heirloom piece. It had been here for so long that it had practically set its own barely noticeable groove across the floor to mark its place. Yet somehow the rug had kept its appearance throughout its long existence, evidence of the preservation magic woven into the seams. On top of the rug was stationed a polished rosewood table that further elevated the feeling of opulence. The wood's deep color almost shone red as the light danced off its surface, the grain catching and reflecting it in an eye-catching way. Anyone with an appreciation for woodworking would immediately recognize that the table was the pinnacle of craftsmanship. On the left, occupying one of the 8 matching high-backed chairs, sat a young man deep in thought as his fingers lightly caressed the wood grain. His otherwise smooth young face showed a visible scar running from the left temple to the corner of his mouth. His ears were so heavily mangled that there was no way to tell his race with certainty, but his slightly slanted eyes spoke of elvish blood, even as his average frame suggested the possibility of human origins. At the far end of the table sat a short, athletic man of indeterminate age, wearing a hardened leather tunic on top of his simple attire. Closer examination revealed pockmarks that betrayed the tunic's busy past in protecting its wearer. His hardened face showed a hint of a smile, while his piercing black eyes were clearly monitoring everything in the room. In front of him sat a plate with a half-eaten roll, some cheese, and a cup of ale. Everyone was quietly occupied with their thoughts until the faint sounds of footsteps echoed from outside the room. They were followed a few seconds later by the door opening to reveal an odd-looking couple. One was a foreign-looking dwarf, his dark complexion unusual in a place like Lavatown. His compact and powerful pugilist's physique was somehow mismatched with the kind, cheerful face. He was wearing a light brown cassock over his simple clothes, which did nothing to hide his bulging muscles. He wore an iron chain with a fist-side iron symbol of Thor around his neck. Right behind him came a frail, pale human who had to duck through the doorway and whose head almost reached the ceiling as she straightened up again. Her yellow hair was tucked neatly into a straw hat. The hat was matched by her light brown eyes, which peered down suspiciously. Her light robe was open to show a shirt that was too short and left her midriff partly exposed, while her pants barely reached the top of her ankle-high boots. With her right hand, she reached back and closed the door softly behind her. The man at the head of the table cleared his throat. Well, now that everybody's here, I suppose we can begin. He raised his head towards the couple who had just entered, gesturing toward the serving table. Solis, Lomek, please grab yourself something to eat and come sit with us. Then he turned to his left to look at the elven woman. Nael, why don't you join us too? He said, pointing at the table. The woman looked back at him for a moment, then stood up and moved gracefully to one of the high-backed chairs. She sat down across from the scarred man, who had raised his head but whose hands still rested softly on the table in a way that seemed almost intimate. Solis and Lomek quickly filled their plates. He also grabbed a cup of ale while she satisfied herself with water. Then they both made their way back to the table and sat down. The man at the head of the table cleared his throat again and opened his mouth. There was a loud knock on the door. He closed his mouth, a look of irritation on his face. There was another knock. The man rose to his feet and barked. What's going on? We're in a meeting. The door opened and in it stood the sentry who had been guarding the hallway. He was holding up a gnome by the scruff of the neck, dangling him in the air. The gnome was wearing all black. The dimly lit corridor in his olive skin made it difficult to see exactly where the garment ended and his body began. Caught this one tailing the other two, the guard said gruffly. The gnome raised his face, looking at the man at the far end of the table and giggled. Sorry, Brad. I know you said to forget about it. He shifted his gaze momentarily to Solis. But she was interesting. His face betrayed the youthful enthusiasm of a teenager. He giggled again. Brad glared at him for a second and broke into a smile and chuckled. Put him down, he said to the guard, who dropped the gnome unceremoniously to the floor before turning back on his heels and walking back towards his station. You know what, Garrett? Brad turned his gaze towards the gnome. Why don't you join us? This group could probably make use of your talents anyway. Then he looked at the others and added cheerfully, just y'all make sure you hide your valuables around him. And that's that.
The group comes together.
Starting to tie it together.
Yeah.
They're coming together.
And from the perspective of the group, not that individual like you had in the first act.
Yeah, it's perhaps the hardest thing to do for me in this book is I'm trying to maintain the perspective of all 5 of them throughout the story.
Well, this sure leads me to want to know what's next.
Yeah.
And I would be okay with another chapter right now.
I'm okay with it too. I'm here to have fun, right?
Because of I don't want to wait 2 weeks to find out why they're together.
Okay. All right.
But it's
Up to you. Dan, you get
call.
that?
I'm happy to hear it.
And all the work
Always.
just set up.
Here's the problem.
It's working.
I'm gonna have to read it on my phone then,
I don't
because
care
you
what
guys
do.
have the iPad for the Zoom.
Got it.
I can get my other. I have another iPad and I can bring up what you sent me.
No, I'm totally fine.
Okay.
I've read on my phone.
I know.
Yeah.
You did it in a bar.
Yeah, I was gonna say, much more difficult setting than this.
But because there's a couple more characters that we haven't met, right?
Brad,
Brad was like, oh wait, is this a human because of the name? That kind of, was he the human?
Brad,
Jeff.
2 Ds,
Scott. Oh, 2D.
2 Ds, Brad.
Okay, so it's a little messed up.
Brad.
It's a little
Brad.
children. But the other thing, like talking about the 2 individuals that were like, one had the pockmarks on his leather things, like
That's
this
Brad.
has saved
That's
us.
Brad.
Okay,
Brad.
okay.
That's Brad.
And then the other guy with the loose clothes with no weapons.
The assassin?
Obviously trained. Yeah, that was cool.
Yeah, I was curious about that.
But
What that communicates to you as the reader.
it was like this. Okay, and now I want to know more about that one because he's just sitting there and he's quiet and he's like, he's a trained assassin. Okay, or not. I mean, you said maybe he is.
Why is so quiet? Why is he so quiet?
I'm curious how
Yeah.
that comes across. Like,
Yeah.
why would Brad want to have one there? So he clearly thinks that these people that he's inviting are perhaps dangerous.
I didn't get that Brad was the one who invited people.
You will
Or
get it.
characters.
You will get it in a second.
Okay.
But yeah.
Let's go with it.
So shall we jump into it? Triple feature?
Sure.
Why
Triple
not?
feature.
We're here.
Act 2, Chapter 3. We might do a quadruple feature. Who the hell knows?
Yeah, screw all of it.
Want to play half of it back?
Yeah, you don't want to play. You don't want to play. I have my friends here. I don't care. Right? That's what matters
They're
to me.
all your friends.
So Chapter 2. Sorry. Act 2. Chapter 3. Group formation. You can aviation joke. All right, folks. Brad said once Garrett sat down at the opposite end of the table. First, thank you for entertaining me by coming here. Brad shifted his gaze to Lormic, then added, some of you, perhaps, more purposefully than the others. Then he looked at Nayel, who returned his gaze, her face expressionless. Lormic, meanwhile, stole a glance at Solace. Why do I find her so interesting, he thought. She ignored him. Brad raised his glass to his lips. Let's get down to business, shall we? He coughed slightly and continued. So you may have guessed already that I work with the Thieves Guild, he said, pausing to observe their reactions. Aidan, who until that moment was seemingly transfixed by the table, raised his head to look at Brad. Garrett giggled. Garrett here is one of my agents, Brad said after flashing the gnome a look of mild disapproval. But he's actually not the only one who has been in my employment, just the only one who realizes it. He stopped again and looking around the table satisfied himself that he had now everyone's undivided attention. Take, for example, Solace, he said, pointing upwards at her. She thinks I only hired her yesterday, but in reality, we have been the ones buying everything she has been stealing for the last year. No, I know I lied to you yesterday, but it was really just a small lie, and only so you would be less nervous coming here, he added hastily as Solace's face registered surprise and then irritation. And please rest your fist there, my dear. No harm will come to you. That part wasn't a lie, and you know we could have bound you when you came in here if we wanted. Solace stared at him for several long seconds, then slowly relaxed her fingers. The others exchanged glances. What was going on here? The thought echoed in their faces. The rest of you don't know this, but other than being a petty thief, this remarkable young woman represents an extremely rare phenomenon, something that I only heard about but never encountered before in my life. So rare, in fact, that the scribes in Corunta City say the chances of it happening are 1 in a million. It certainly hasn't ever happened here in Lavatown as far as anyone can tell, at least not since the days of Kelstra. With everyone's eyes on him, Brad took another sip, sat down his glass, and clasped his hands. Then he eased his chair back, crossed his legs, and focused again on Solace as he addressed the gathering. You see, Solace is a wild mage. Niall gasped. Aidan's fingers stopped their delicate dance. Lormic raised his hand instinctively to the symbol of Thor on his chest. Solace lowered her head slightly, looking at Brad with a mixture of concern and fear, and her fist balled up again. Well, wait, you mean like she does magic? Garrett's slightly high-pitched voice was excited. Like real magic? Like magic? Yes, Garrett, magic. And Solace, look, you've done an excellent job at figuring out this stuff for yourself without getting noticed, but we do know most of what's going on around this town. And as he spoke, Solace's face turned red, her eyes full with anger. Then suddenly, contemptuously, she released her fist in Brad's direction. They all felt the shockwave, an immense energy being released all at once. They could even see the vague outlines of it, rapidly spreading out from Solace like water bursting through a dam. They sensed a raw wave of power that would have blasted the room to smithereens and injured everyone in it. Yet it didn't. Instead, the table suddenly glowed a strange, faint, yellowish blue color that matched the shockwave. Blasting out of Solace's fingers, the expanding energy orb collapsed into a flat cone, which hung in the air looking like it hit an invisible barrier. Then it fell onto the table and dissipated. Aidan cried in pain as his hands jerked away. He carefully spread his palms only to find them unharmed. His anguished look was replaced with one of curiosity as he carefully placed his hands back on the table. Though Brad smiled broadly and appeared unruffled, he nevertheless flinched as the wave was unleashed at him, and he took another sip before resuming. And this, people, is a demonstration. Sorry about that, Aidan, but I promise you it would have been much worse had we not arranged to have a very expensive, by the way, ward in place for exactly this sort of reaction. As for you, Solace, as you can see, your magic can be resisted, but if you choose to work with us, then we can also help you get better with it. Much better, in fact. Solace, however, was not paying him any attention. Instead, she inhaled slowly, almost in a trance, with her nostrils quivering and her eyes half closed. So now that this little bit of excitement is over, don't worry, everyone, she won't be able to do it again for a good while. The energy expenditure is not insignificant. We can get back to our reason for being here today. Brad's voice was calm as he looked around the table. You see, the Guild has always had agents everywhere in Lavatown, but the truth is we may have developed a bit of a blind spot right here in the Shallows. Most of you have grown up here, so you probably know why. There isn't anything particularly interesting going on around in the Shallows, except for the docks. A suppressed snort came from the other end of the table. Brad stared at Garrett severely as the latter went through several seconds of obvious discomfort, trying to get the huge grin on his face under control. Nael, who was watching this pantomime dispassionately, turned her head back towards Brad. So, in the spirit of transparency, she spoke the word with a sneer, pointing at Garrett. What is he laughing at? Brad sighed. I suppose it won't hurt to tell you this, but there is, of course, one more area of major interest in the Shallows. You want to tell them, Garrett, before your face implodes? Garrett broke into a grin again. The prison! He exclaimed, before biting noisily into an apple. Right, the prison. I suspect that none of you knew this? Brad let the question hang in the air for a moment. Lomic raised an eyebrow, then tentatively spoke up. My dad said something like that existed, but it was well hidden deep in the inner Shallows, and I shouldn't worry about it because the town didn't care about Shallows wretches, and the prison wasn't for us. Right he was, Brad said. Rajiv, isn't it? That's your dad's name? The priest of Frag? Lomic nodded. Anyway, so we have the docks and the prison, and the Guild has an interest in both. But the rest, especially the inner Shallows, well, looks like we haven't been paying enough attention, which is how we missed the miracle that is Solace. And for that matter, you. In saying that, he turned to Nael. Huh? Nael, you can do some pretty unusual things with sounds, can't you? Nael looked at him with surprise and a hint of fear. No, don't worry, not here to harm you, any of you, but you do have special, extraordinarily rare skills, and you develop them right here in the Shallows, which tells us that something is going on that we need to understand. See, folks, Nael here can apparently, Brad paused for a second. How did he describe it? Shape the sound of her voice? How about a little demonstration? Nael looked back at him, having regained her composure. Don't know what you're talking about, she demurred. Oh, I am quite certain that you do, darling. Brad smiled. Darian, that is his name, right? It was quite explicit. Nael stared daggers at him. He said, Brad opened the folded piece of paper he produced from his tunic. He said, and I quote, that she can sing one song to two people at once and each will hear it different. Sound like you, darling? Nael's face was frozen in silence. I told you, we know many things. Point is, the ability to shape sound, to physically manipulate it, is pretty rare too, just like Solace and her magic. In fact, Brad opened up his arms as he addressed the gathering. Scholars will tell you that without the knowledge gained from some ancient manuals written by the great Bard Zacharias himself, they wouldn't even know that it existed. You know his writings date back all the way to the construction of Stonebridge, right? That he was a member of Kenzor's group? Nael's look of suspicion was replaced with one of intense interest. She leaned forward. Wait, what? You know of him? You have more of his books? Not just books, dear. We have access to scrolls, parchments, notes, and more. Thing is, while nobody knows exactly how rare it is, this trait is certainly not a common one. We're not aware of anyone here else who has it in Lavatown. It's possible that they do, of course, since it's not the kind of thing that anyone would notice easily. Definitely not like Solace and her bag of tricks. Our records, which admittedly are only truly comprehensive when it comes to the higher shelves, do not speak of anyone else born in the city with this ability. Brad took another sip from his wine glass. Thus, we now have two confirmed occurrences of extremely rare talents, both of whom have come from the Shallows at around the same time. We at the Guild have a saying, once is a coincidence, but twice is a pattern. And then, of course, we have Aidan. Aidan, who had remained quiet until that moment, raised his head and looked at Brad in surprise. His scar glinted in the light. Me? Yes, you. Show them your bow. My bow? Yes, your bow. Come on, show them. Aidan rose slightly, then reached behind the drapes hanging by the entrance and brought out a long bow. He returned to his chair and placed the bow on the table. Everyone looked at it. A flicker of interest passed over the face of the assassin, still standing silently at the back wall. Garrett stood at his chair and leaned over. His eyes grew wide and he gasped, then whistled in appreciation. This bow is unlike any other. It looks expensive and extremely well made, doesn't it? But even if you don't know anything about bows, look closely and you will still be able to see that the wood grain matches its curves perfectly all over, which you don't usually see in wooden objects. Brad let them lean over and examine it. In fact, there is only one other place in this room where this is true right now. They raised their heads questioningly. Take your hands off the table, will you, Aidan? Thank you. Now look, the rest of you. Look, right there. They looked. Indeed, where Aidan's hands had been caressing the table, the wood had shifted its grain as if it were rearranged by some mysterious force. The effect was subtle, and none of them would have noticed it on their own, but once you knew where to look, it was plain as day. The wood in that spot seemed almost happier, its imperfections all smoothed out, as if it was the one spot where it was no longer in pain from becoming a table. He wasn't even doing it consciously, Brad spoke up, but Aidan has a special relationship with wood, so special that he can apparently heal it with his touch. Word of his unusual talent had reached out all the way to the mainland. Aidan was plainly surprised at this, where one of our agents heard about it. So they tracked down one of his bows, bought it, and had it inspected and appraised. The king's own master archer said that the only thing he had ever seen like it was hanging in the king's museum. A bow that was used by Kelstor himself. Brad took a breath. Imagine my surprise to learn that the third Shallows denizen had an unusual mystical skill like that. Forget two being a pattern. Now it's a story. And we have a particular interest in stories, he concluded and sat back, his arms crossed over his chest. A few seconds passed in silence. Anyway, seeing as I'm in charge of guild operations down here, I thought, let's put this little group of special people together and see what we can figure out about all of you. What about the dwarf and the gnome? Niall asked. Right. Well, to be fair, Garrett wasn't supposed to be here at all, but he has been part of our recent push to get some fresh eyes and ears on the ground down here, so it's probably not a bad idea for him to be a part of this. As for Lormek, personally, I don't know what's special about him. No offense intended, Lormek, but it seems like someone who matters thinks he's important, and I was told to include him. Maybe he has some special skill that I'm unaware of. I trust that whoever decided he should be here knows why. After a moment to let them digest this, Brad added, what do you say, folks? Sound interesting? Want to work with us? Garrett chuckled and happily raised his thumb. Aidan and Niall looked at each other, then both nodded their heads. A moment later, Lormek nodded resignedly as well. Solace, who had been studiously ignoring Lormek, smiled at him briefly. Then she turned to Brad and said, okay, whatever, man. I don't care, long as I can keep practicing. So what do you want us to do?
I was surprised that he's not calling all the shots.
Yeah.
He was told to include this guy.
Which is another plot hook, right? It's a plot hook.
There's another layer of authority. Very good description on the manipulation of wood and the grain and the bow and tying that together. And historically, no one's ever seen anything like that. So there was 3 unusual beings here, and so it's not just it's a story.
The story.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, it resonates with me on that, being able to move the song once you sing it.
Did you remember Darren at all from Niall's story? The guy that she ended up he became her paramour, the soldier that ended up inviting him.
I didn't remember it now that you say it.
Yep. I was curious if that would, because that's like that is an example of tying a tiny loose end from the history into the present moment.
I mean, when you read it. But,
So
it's good.
So now they've all met each other.
Yep.
And they realize that they're going to work together, but they don't know why. So that's the next chapter.
Well, and also Brad doesn't know why.
No, Brad knows where he's going to send them. He
Oh,
just
he knows that. He
He
doesn't.
knows.
He doesn't know why the individuals. were
they
wrong.
didn't know. That's well, the way he describes it, he doesn't know, right?
Yeah, he
right?
said, I was told.
Yes,
told
I
to do
mean,
this.
remember that the guild, the Thieves Guild, is essentially less a Thieves Guild and more like an intelligence organization, right?
Yeah.
It's more
Yeah,
like a
you
CIA
described
than right.
Yeah.
So there's
You
a lot.
described that outside of the writing, though. It's not. That hasn't been evident in the story, just in your description of the story.
Well, now you're starting to get a little inkling of it.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, other than what you saying it.
Tiny bit. When the
I guess that there's a clandestine organization that has power.
yeah, you'll find in the mission that it sounds more like that. So
It's good.
Anything
That's
else?
my feedback for tonight.
it's good. All right.
More
Works for
than
me.
it's good.
Yeah.
I mean, just the
Well, again, we're building again, right? It's like in the first act, we were started by building, and then we were starting to get to a point where we were like experiencing it, and now we're building again. So it's like, I think I have some questions, but they're going to be either answered or highlighted.
Feel free
based
to
on
ask.
the next thing.
Mhm.
So at this point, they've kind of introduced everybody,
Yes,
right? in the
to each other, right?
to each other.
Yeah.
And
the
so,
five.
so really next, I get all that from the first act, right? Like a lot of those details are tiebacks too. So it's like, that's perfect. And then, obviously something's coming next in the next part of the meeting. And so,
So this is, we talk about tropes. This should feel familiar. This is a little bit like a Mission Impossible sort of script, right?
okay. Yeah.
Oh,
Your mission, should you choose to accept it,
Yeah.
I just haven't told you what the mission is, right?
Yeah.
But we're at that
but
moment,
bring in the talented people, the talented different
right?
ways.
So we are at the moment of like, your mission, should you choose to accept
Yeah.
it, is the next chapter,
Yeah.
right?
If that's the next chapter, then I would suggest you wait until more of our audience is here.
Yeah.
For that.
But that's when they're going to be given their, and they're going to, it's so yes,
Should you
there's
choose
a
to
Mission
accept it.
Impossible sort of
Yeah.
Yeah.
you're supposed to get that feel from it.
Uh-huh.
Right?
Well, you built it up good. Well,
Yeah.
to get to that place.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think you'll have fun with it once you
I'm
once.
having fun with it now, and since the day in the bar.
Yeah.
No, I would be. And I'm glad that I've only no judgment. I've only missed one, and then you were able to fill me in before the next one. So, because 2 weeks is 2 weeks. For me, that's a little long to remember some of the details from the past.
Fair. Yeah. That happens to me too sometimes.
But I know it'll be tough to do every week with the. I mean, obviously, it's tough tonight to do every two.
It is.
And pull
It's
people
challenging.
together.
Yeah, it's the interesting part of all this, right? I know in my dream it was like I would end up doing this in a pub somewhere, right?
You still can't. I mean, this is prologue for you to do that. I mean, you're learning too.
I am learning
do the
so much.
performance part.
Even my reading, I think, has improved so much since the first one. right?
Really?
Yeah.
Because
Feels that way.
I do compare back to like what's the name of that place we're having lunch?
Down in Rockridge.
No. Yeah, right.
In Rockridge. I don't remember the name of the place, but I remember the
Oh.
place.
Oh, I thought it was a place you went all the time. But anyway,
I do, and I don't remember the list. Like
when you
some
did
bar.
that, and I saw the animation, and I saw the enthusiasm, and
Yeah.
it was catching, and it was something that you imparted to me. I was like, I'm getting that. You might feel like you're getting better at it because you're getting more confident, but you then are doing the performance art reading that you were doing now.
Yeah.
You're good at this.
Oh, thank you.
I mean, good at the writing, obviously.
Yeah.
And you know that. But this is your first foray into performance art. And you're good at
What do you think about the things that are clearly happening behind the scenes between Lomic and Solace? Or between, I wouldn't say between Lomic and Solace. It's more
Yeah.
Lomic on
I was
Solace,
gonna
right?
say, Laura Mick's the one.
it. He keeps saying,
You know.
she's fetching.
Yeah, he's very.
Laura Mick's the one taken with her, right? Did she?
And she's
did
like,
she
at some
realize-
point she notices. Yeah, so
Okay,
there's the
yeah.
whole point where she ignores him for
'cause there was
the.
like the discomfort around her, right?
Yeah. Keep that in mind because that's a theme.
It's about to get more uncomfortable.
Yes.
Does that werewolf group come back in?
Eventually.
Sorry.
I have not wasted your time with that prologue, I promise you. Everything that happened there matters in some way.
Well, I sure hope killing that little kid did
Like
too.
matters,
Yeah,
yeah.
because other than that, it's gratuitous, make Rick feel bad.
Oh, well, then I'm going to go and just change it to
It's gonna be
gratuitous.
okay.
It gets worse. It's gonna be okay. It comes back to life, I promise.
Yeah.
Or part of him.
Well, it's not the only kid, right?
No, but that one was up close and personal.
The dwarf kid or the
On the ship,
wolf,
the
no, the
drowned,
dwarven kid,
yeah.
yeah.
For me, maybe it was because one of my like archetypes of death that to fear is drowning for me since I was born. I think I don't know why. I did past life regression once to say, what the heck is going on here?
Yeah.
They didn't come up with anything.
No.
I know, it would have been cool.
Tried the bottom and nothing came up.
No bodies with hooks.
Yeah. Oh well. Maybe next time.
One can only hope.
So that was a rapid barreling through 3 of these. There are now 10 more chapters that are written.
Yeah.
10 and a half, almost 11. Going to be 11 by the end of this weekend.
Excellent.
So my biggest concern has always been, am I going to be able to keep pace with the readings, right?
Right. Yeah, totally.
You will, because you'll put a little pressure on yourself and you'll get it done.
Perhaps, right?
But that's one of those things, I'm sure, because you were talking before about, this is just the story that you don't feel like you're actually creating. It's in your head already. You're putting it down.
Yeah,
Mhm.
just getting it out.
down. And if you were pressured into a deadline that's out external to you, then it might change things a little bit.
Yeah, it might change it. Yeah.
Well, it is a story that's written in my head. I was finding the time to put it down. But I got to tell you, the thing that makes it the most difficult is the quarrelsome 5 of them that are in my head constantly sniping and saying, no, that's not what I'm going to say.
Talking over each other.
There's this kind of a therapy called voice dialogue, because everyone has different personality parts in them. And there's the one that you choose to put in the driver's seat at that time. That kind of therapy is give it that time. And I'll bet that's what you do.
Well, but the problem is I'm doing 5 of them at once.
Well, doing them at once, that's what I'm saying. Don't do them at once. And they're trying, if you put one in the driver's seat, and this is from his perspective or her perspective, and doing it, give it 100% that attention.
Well, there's going to be, I mean, we're switching from description to dialogue a lot.
So that.
And it's going to happen more and more. And once it gets into, I mean, they're going to come, I hope these characters come more alive. These heroes will come more alive for you.
Yeah.
And their personalities come out then.
They already are, I hope. to
Well,
some
they
degree.
are, but
Yeah,
in
they are.
descriptive, it doesn't come out as much as dialogue. What's easier for you?
Both are fine.
I think the more we pass over them, the more detail we're getting.
Although I think dialogue works a little better in how it doesn't feel easier for me.
Yeah.
But I think it carries more impact. We'll see how you feel as we proceed,
Yeah.
because there's a lot of that coming up. We're at the point of dialogue and action constantly.
I imagine, because I haven't done this kind of writing, I imagine that like a dialogue thing is something your mind's ear hears, and the description is something your mind's eye sees.
Right.
Yeah.
And they're
Correct.
two different,
They are 2 different things.
very parts of like what you tap into, I guess.
They are. It's, when I write one of those, it's different than when I write, like each type is written in a different way.
And they're both of those things are equally like freely available to you.
They are, but I think because the heroes, I call them characters because of my D&D background, but the heroes are because they're alive in my head. They almost speak more naturally. Like I don't have the mind's eye is different than the mind's ear in the sense that one is like I'm just putting down what they're telling me, and the other one I'm like having to describe what I've seen.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So
that's
there's
what I was
one
trying
extra
to-
step.
I was trying to say.
One
Yeah.
extra step. But it can be kind of interesting
Well, I'm sure, and this it's interesting for me, and I think Dan has said this before, to see this process.
Yeah.
You know, the
See it
story
work
is
out.
great, and I like what you're doing, and I love having these kind of like, you know, just give it some feedback stuff after it. But the process that you're describing, it's interesting to me.
It's fascinating for me. I mean,
Yeah,
I'd
okay.
written 2 books, but not like this.
Yeah. Very different experience, right?
Very, very different.
Yeah, this is fantastical. The other ones were like experiential.
Right.
Yes.
There's a whole layer to this that's different because I mean, ultimately, it's not, you know, when you write the professional books, even the story-based ones are based on something that happened, like some reality
Yeah.
I'm describing. And to some degree, this is also like weaving a cloth, right? You're like,
Yeah. Definitely.
I think what they have in common is they're all storytelling, right? So it's like it's got that
Mhm.
common thread, but this is you come at it from a very different angle on this one, right?
yeah, because it's creating like the story didn't exist before it started, right?
Yeah.
So that's the difference, right? When I'm
That is exactly right. This is pure creativity, creation. You know, and that's no one but you can describe things the way they are in this.
in that world, yes, in this world.
The experiential things that you've written about before, someone else was in part of it each time. They could have described it from their perspective.
Right.
Do you identify with any, or do you identify equally parts of Barack with all of them, or is there one or two that are more you?
All of them are aspects of me.
Yeah.
Well, I that's what I'm saying.
I mean,
imagining that all of
Garrett's
them are-
personality, the trickster kind of like, you know, the punkster kind of thing, totally me. You know this side of me.
Yeah.
You know, the kind of analytical variation of Solace was like
Yeah.
constantly kind of looking for angles and all that stuff. That's totally a part of me. You know, the kindness of Lormic, I think, I like to believe, is part of me, and that's who he is. And that's also going to turn a little crazy as the story advances. So,
like
you say,
Yeah.
like me.
Well, that's what I was kind of
Nael's
trying to get
Nael's
to.
seriousness is another part of me, one that really translates well in a business setting sometimes, right? You
Yes,
know,
needed.
so that's really, really important. And in a strange way, as you will discover as the story continues, Aiden's quiet leadership is another aspect of me, I think. Right? You know, he will step in at the right moment and really own shit. But otherwise, he's not constantly trying to put himself in the center. So that's another aspect. So all of them,
He kind of hangs out in the background, right?
he hangs out in the background until he's needed, and then he really steps in. You'll see this. All of these things that I'm telling you right now will be sort of proven to you as the story evolves and the characters.
That was kind of what I was wondering about. They all have aspects of Barack, and there's like what you just described. Each one of them.
Yeah.
Is there one that you're identifying more with?
I think they're all just facets. I mean, it was kind of funny because I read Whore. Remember the chapter Whore? I remember reading Whore to, of all people, my therapist. I said,
That's what you read to me in the restaurant.
yeah, I love that chapter. And, you know, so I read that to him and he said, oh, that's you.
Cheeky horror.
Interesting. Did not expect that, but okay, you know me well, and I think you are qualified to pass that opinion. So thank you, sir. Right. So you're bringing up a good point, but yeah, that was his reaction, right? So my guy Andrew was like, yeah, that you totally like this was you.
And well, he might have said that when you read other chapters of other characters too.
Oh, sure.
I don't know if you did.
That's just interesting that even a part that maybe you thought you weren't necessarily a part of is like.
Well, but he
tied in.
pointed out that, you know, yes, it's kind of like she's not well, I mean, so sorry, the lady, I don't want to.
Don't jump ahead.
The lady in Whore, who's not Nael, I promise you, but she's. It's one of these funny things, right? And I totally got it later. I'm like, you know, I come across to a lot of people as like a privileged kid. was not a privileged kid at all. I'm also not white. I'm an immigrant, right? That came, that, you know, my country, and basically called black in Israel, right?
What?
Yes, because in Israel, if you're not Eastern European, if you're not that origin, you're called black. So thing you don't know.
Literally?
Yeah, that's the name for yeah. So and so my mom was born in Tunisia, right? And so and my dad does have the Eastern European origin. So I'm half, like I'm a mulatto.
Mulatto,
The term in Hebrew is actually vuz.
Yeah, mudblood.
Exactly. Right. So you have a little bit of that with Lomek, right?
Yeah.
But
tie in, yeah.
but the you know, so the thing about the whore, right, the elven whore, is that it's just that the thing that Ariel picked up on, right? Typically you think of them as like, you know, so there's the image of what an elf is, like very graceful, you know, smart and all this stuff. But in reality, this one is none of these things. She's like a, you know, she's a, yeah, and she's made her own destiny, and she did some horrible things supposedly, right? Some stigmatizing things to get there, but she built herself up that way. And you know, in many ways, that's a reflection of my history, right? And in fact, you know this. I think I don't know if you remember it, but it's a joke I used to say, right? I'm just a whore, right? I sell tricks to the highest bidder for, right? You know, that's technically what I do. Yeah. It's not sexual favors, but it's still the same concept.
Yeah, it's always been prostitute yourself,
right? So
pieces of you.
It's pieces of me, right? So, but without losing the agency in the process, and without actually giving anybody a true part of myself. Like it's the parceling out of, in my case, it's, you know, it's the whatever I can supposedly talk about that makes people happy related to the field that I'm in. But
yeah,
at the end of the day, same concept, right? And at the same time, she has wanderlust. She goes and tries things. I have wanderlust. I try things like writing this stupid book, right?
Yeah.
And so I totally get why he was saying, "Oh, that's you," but all of these characters are me. Yeah. The you know, the mother origins, right? The mud kid origins of Lomek. That's me too, right? And so you're right. Every one of them.
I didn't realize that one, but that's a good time too.
This is a very good undertaking for you, no matter what any kind of outcome. This process and the unfolding of things and all that, you know, you're doing really, really good work. And it's entertaining to people like us.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
And as I said, it's not just entertaining because of the words I'm hearing and reading or whatever. It's also seeing the creativity process is cool.
Well, thank you.
Then you've come up with a few things that obviously resonated with me. The kid dying, I've already said it. And the notes shift. So shooting two arrows at the same time, and being able to direct.
You need to wait another 10 chapters before there's a.
It's all good.
It's like, damn, my strong suit. Well, thank you, Barak. That was the book 5. Act 2, chapters 1, 2, and bonus 3. And we are really looking forward to hearing what comes next.
Yeah.
Next time.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. Thank you. Let's see.